All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to National Poetry Month, Week 2. Hey, oh. All right. So I want to remind everybody, if you are on the YouTube channel or the Facebook page or the X link, if you're right now, hey there, Philip. How you doing, brother? Good to see you out there in TV land. Glad to have you on the session. Hey, if you, Mr. Philip, or anyone else is a poet of any kind, there are links in the description page, both on the Facebook and on the YouTube channel, for people to send in their poetry. So say that you are an aspiring poet and you want somebody who is a poet who has stuff published, which is me. Not that I'm like the end all be all or anything like that, but just that like somebody who's done some poetry stuff before, right? To review your poetry and then give you some feedback on it. Feel free and please do use the email and the links in the description on the YouTube and the Facebook page to send us your poetry, and we will read it, we will dissect it, we will give you some. Hey, cool, Philip. That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Cool. So we can go into something that you might be able to either share, either as a teacher or to use in your own way, as we talk about language and poetry going forward. But if anybody out there is an individual poet, right, and wants to share some of their work, they're welcome to send us the email address in the description, and we'll be happy to take that and give you individualized feedback in the same sense as a writer's workshop would do going forward. So if that's something you're interested in, feel free to do that. If not, feel free to take this content, share this content going forward. However, it helps the world appreciate poetry a little bit more. Hey, we're here for that, and that's the whole purpose of this thing. All right, all right, all right. So today we're going to talk about specifically. We talked last time about metaphor in a very deep kind of way, right? And so now we're going to talk about language and parallelism, right? So parallelism is when you have language that is referring to something that is beyond itself, right? So we're going to see a very lovely instance of this in this poem on the right hand side of your screen right now. I'll zoom in a bit more so you can see a bit better. I'll embiggen it a bit and move over a bit. Boom, called Natural Disaster, okay? We're going to look at the way that language is being used in this poem to refer to both what the poem is talking about and something bigger than itself, something bigger and more societally prevalent than the poem itself is talking about. So, without further ado, we'll get. And so there's also there are two or three more poems today that we'll read aloud and then analyze, right? That are also part of this bigger theme. Okay, and so if it doesn't make complete sense right away in this first poem, that's okay. If you have any questions, put them up in the chat on any platform you're on. We can see them all here on StreamYard and hit you back with those. So if you have any questions, please put them up. I will be answering all questions before we're done. Okay. All right. So let's go to the first poem here. Okay. It's called Natural Disaster. All right. All right. That someone has less might make you happy with yours, or unhappy to think about portions at all. Those who have very little, studies say, are more inclined to give half away. Maybe being closer to nothing makes stuff not matter so much, or a few things matter a lot. Maybe gratitude isn't best measured by comparison. All right. So what we're talking is a very, very short poem. Let me zoom out a bit so you can see the whole thing in one shot, right? Boom, there it is, all in one shot, right? Very, very neat, very tight poem. Some rhyme in there too, right? But basically what we're talking about here is how language in a very narrow sense, right, in a very narrow construction, can be used to talk about bigger issues, bigger social issues, bigger metaphysical issues, bigger life issues, right? So we have here, okay, that something that someone has less might make you happy with yours, or unhappy to think about portions at all, right? So we're talking about here, right? We're talking about the very specific notion that someone who has something, the haves in society, those who have a lot, right? So the idea that somebody who has less than you, like, oh, that poor person who has less than me might either make you happy with what you have, which is a positive response, right? Or it might also make you very unhappy to think about that there are other people out there who have less than you, and so maybe you are entitled to what you have. Maybe it's a whole different thing to think about portions at all, right? And then they go back here, and it's a very interesting and funny turn of phrase here, right? Those who have little studies say, right? And it's funny to use the word studies say because that's very modern interpretation, right? That's a very modern notion. Oh, survey says this, survey says that, right? Well, the same idea actually goes back to biblical times, right? Remember the woman who only had a penny to throw in, and she threw her penny in, and then there was the Jewish rabbi who had a bunch to throw in, and he threw only part of his in. And he's like, and Jesus was like, hey man, like how screwed up is it that this woman who only has a penny threw her penny in, right? And you who have so much only threw half of your lot in, right? So I think it's very important to consider how this poem is bringing, which is a very ancient concept of those who give what they have as opposed to those who give only part of what they have, right, are doing more. And so when this poem says studies say, right, it's both being accurate because it is a proven statistical fact, but also it's more than that. It's also this shooting back to the day back when Jesus was rocking the earth and was talking about these things. And so it's just very interesting to think about how it does both of these kind of things at the same time, right? All right. Maybe being closer to nothing, this line right here, right? Maybe being closer to nothing makes stuff not matter so much. So we think about this in the context of somebody who is of a lower socioeconomic status, maybe not having, when you don't have a Ferrari and a Benz and a house, when you're living month to month in a project, or when you're living month to month in a rent controlled apartment or in an apartment at all, right? Like, you're so much closer to actually owning nothing that all the stuff you have doesn't really matter so much, right? So it's very much a true saying about that, right? Or a few things matter a lot. So let's look at that again. So it kind of flips the script on that again, right? Is that the things you have? So that say that you're someone who is experiencing homelessness, hypothetically, right? And the things that you have are a your childhood baby blanket that your mama gave you and that you plan to give to your daughter or your son, your childhood baby blanket, and you have pictures of you and your home and your mom and your dad when you were 10, right? And these very few things that you have, they're not worth anything monetarily. There's no money interest in that, right? But these things themselves are valuable to you because you don't have these material things. You have these very personal things, and those matter a lot more to you than does somebody's Ferrari, somebody's Bentley, somebody's whatever, right? And so that's where that kind of, and it's in that bracket, right? Or a few things matter a lot, right? And that's how another way to read that poem is that these very few things you have, which are personal memories, not material things, not material possessions, but very sincere, closely held things, matter a lot to you, right? And then the final line of the poem, very good. Maybe gratitude isn't best measured by comparison. So, what is gratitude, right? So, gratitude is something I believe, and I think y'all would believe if you just look around, right? Gratitude is something that's very lacking in today's society. For people to be grateful for what we have, no matter where we are or who we are, right? The fact that we are grateful for having whatever it is we have, that's very much lacking, right? And so to measure gratitude, like I'm grateful because I have this much, and you're more grateful because you have that much, right? This poem is trying to say, like, maybe that's not the way to measure gratitude. Maybe gratitude is best measured by having enough to get by. Maybe gratitude is measured by having enough to be alive. Maybe gratitude is measured by being alive in a moment, right? And that's where that poem kind of hits. So that's And this is not a poem. This is a poem one of my friends from Tupelo Press wrote. It's a very lovely poem. This next poem though, called Casualties, is a poem I wrote. So if anybody has questions about this poem, you can put them in the chat and I can answer them explicitly because it's a poem that I actually wrote, had published, and it's in a book that's called Casualties. So if anyone wants to poke my brain or figure out about this, you can feel free to do so. Let me see if I can make it, if I embiggen it a bit more. And we'll see if we can go here. All right. So Casualties. The deer in the woods is a buck. In the woods at dusk, nothing is visible. The woods are a sometimes father. At times, a father can become invisible. But the spiced smell of his Copenhagen long cut always dribbles over the balcony railings. Whenever he's decided he's on the hunt, whenever deer gather around the wicker furniture, spread across the lawn like fortifications, defensive emplacements, the daughter darts across porches, breathless, silently shooing the deer before they become casualty, before the father, who wants to be left alone, begins the killing of things to end his loneliness, or rather, to release the solitary feeling of death, which sometimes finds him on the balcony at dusk when the flask has gone empty in his hand. And so again, like if there are any questions, go ahead and put them in. I'll take them as they come. But this poem, as far as I see it, right, is about it's about two things, right? It's about first, there's very much a scene that's happening, right? And the scene as I see it, right, at least when I wrote the poem, is there's this guy, there's a dad, he's a veteran, he's from the Marines or whatever, right? And he's up and he's bought a house. He has a house and he has some land, and there are some deer who walk across his land occasionally, right? And so he is up on the balcony with a rifle, gonna shoot him some deer, right? And there is also his daughter, who's maybe more innocent than he is, hasn't seen the stuff that he's seen, being a veteran, right? She's not been there. And so this daughter is very concerned about the fact her dad is going to shoot these deer that are on the property. And so the daughter is running around trying to chase the deer. Deer, get Bambi, get away! Bambi, get away! Right? And so we have two different perspectives at that point, right? We have the father who's entitled to shoot the deer on his property and maybe wants to use them for meat or whatever. That's not what we're talking about. We have a daughter who's also very just upset about this taking of life. Like, why do you kill Bambi? Why are you shooting the deer, right? And there's a misunderstanding or a non-understanding that's there, right? And so the whole point of the poem is it's speaking to more than just the situation at hand. It's more than just the situation where there's a father on a balcony about to shoot deer. It goes to a gap in understanding between generations. It goes to the violence that's occurring and how it is misunderstood between the young and the older, right? And so I think it's just a very a decent example of what we're talking about with the expansiveness. Again, like yesterday or last week rather, we talked about how metaphor works, right? And now we're just talking about the expansiveness of language, how language itself can take in from one experience or from one scenario that's portrayed on a page and talk about the whole of life or the whole of human experience based upon a very narrow set of facts you're seeing in the poem itself, right? And so we have here, for example, right, the poem is talking about there's a deer in the woods at dusk. There's a father who's up on a balcony. He's a little drunk. Maybe he's had a couple shots, but he's upset or is taking issue with the deer being on his property, and he's ready to get his rifle out and take the deer down, right? And the way that he couches this, right, is very much in the kind of military terms you can gather from the text of the poem. The father's a veteran, right? And so the way that he conceives of the world, the way that he sees the world, is in very military terms, right? The um the wicker furniture, the lawn furniture, your lawn chairs, your table there with the umbrella on it, and the lawn, right? Like these are not seen by the father in this poem as necessarily, right, as a nice sun chair, a nice, lovely, sun table. The father sees them in the last line of this poem, right, as fortifications, defensive emplacements. The father sees the deer as using his own lawn furniture as, the same way that the guys when they crossed Normandy Beach in D-Day, right, were using that barbed wire and those tank traps, right, and Saving Private Ryan, right? So there's a whole perspective the father is putting to the world, right, that sees these deer as enemies and sees the way that his land, his house is being used as kind of like a Normandy Beach thing, kind of like there are defensive emplacements of furniture he owns are proffering to him, right? And then we come in the second stanza. So we have defensive, like fortifications, defensive emplacements in the first stanza. Second stanza begins the daughter. So now we have a whole new perspective, right? Same scenario, same perspective or same situation, different perspective, right? We have the daughter, right? So now we're in the daughter's point of view. Now we're seeing the world the way the daughter of the father in the first stanza sees the world, right? So she darts across porches, breathless. Silently, she's like, here, go, go. Because she also doesn't want to, like, let the dad know she's up there because she knows the dad is trying to kill the deer. But she, at the same time, right, is like breathlessly shooing, like, go, go, deer, silently shooing them away before they become the casualty, before the father who knows or who wants to be left alone begins the killing of things to end his loneliness, or rather to release the solitary feelings of death, which finds him sometimes alone on the balcony at dusk, right? So the thing about this, right, is as much as this is about a very specific scenario, right? The father trying to shoot deer on his porch at dusk, and the daughter trying to scare the deer away because she does not want them to be shot, right? This applies in life, in our world we all live in, like it or not, right? To more scenarios than just this single scenario, right? The way that people who have been at war, who've been overseas in combat, the way that people who've been mistreated by police, who've been incarcerated in the prison system, the way that people who government has done them wrong throughout their lives and abused them in ways that are racist or sexist or unfair, right? The way that each of these kind of groups has a particular view on society and on the way things are that has them being hostile to the present situation, right? To based upon their experiences, right? Like that's a valid point of view. And also then you have coming in from below that the innocent point of view of the daughter who doesn't know the world is so screwed up, who doesn't know how evil combat is, how evil war is, how horrible the police can be, how terrible the government can be, how terrible society can be to you, right? Who has this kind of innocent intonation coming up and wanting to like shoo the innocent victims away from the person who's been harshly um harshly in the space of dealing with these terrible things in their life, right? And so I think it's just a good example, if I may say, about how the words in a poem can speak to a very specific, very particular situation. About a dad trying to shoot deer off his porch after dark when the deer are coming on his land. He has some lawn furniture out there, right? It also goes to this more pushing back from the daughter's side about the innocence and about the revitalization of society from a younger generation who's not so jaded, who's not been done so wrong by the system, and kind of a hopefulness looking forward to how that could happen in the future. So that's that poem and that analysis, kind of that point I'm bringing to you, right? Like the point, like just like the previous poem, right? There's a lot going on in the poem, in this specific little box of the poem, but it's not just that. It's speaking to larger things. It's speaking to more important societal trends, and it speaks to our human experience as a whole. All right, so let's go to the next one. I'm not sure the next one. No, we're gonna skip those a bit. We'll go back to those, but there's one I want to do. Heaven. Here we go. Heaven. So again, if people weren't here last week, this is my boy Greg Geis, my best as a friend. I love him to death. He passed away in 2019 late from a brain tumor, but the best man you'll ever meet, and a hilarious guy. You'll get it when I'll read this poem. Freaking funny guy, also a theologian, an ethicist, a philosopher. I mean, oh man, if there were more Greg Geises in the world today, the world would be a great place. It would be a much better place than it is. Okay, so also, so Greg Geis, just so you know, on the background, for all those up there who are Christians, this poem might seem a bit not offensive, but a bit like, huh? Greg Geis studied theology at Oxford. He has a master's of divinity in theology. So what he's doing in these poems are not meant to be offensive. They're playing very fun games with different theologies. And I've talked to him many a late night about these things. And so I can try to put these together for people who might be a bit upset about them if it is offensive or seems that way to a Christian sensibility. I don't think it is, but if you feel that way, we'll patch that up, okay? All right. So the poem's called Heaven. My theology is fuzzy, but my hopes are high. Perhaps I'll see my old dog Biscuit or chill with a friend or two. And wonder of wonders, my headmistress ex-wife will finally have my undivided attention. I'll find out whether God has a name stitched on his shirt, or, as undercover boss, mans a register behind the counter. I'm hoping I'll get credit for all the times I walked right up to the edge and stopped. But who's to say? Maybe the old boy will just shrug his shoulders and say, your craziness is my craziness, and call it a day. I asked some questions for Socrates and even a few for Jesus. But if everything's wrapped up, then there may be nothing left to talk about. Down here on goofball Earth, it's another story. Tangoing through the void, hobnobbing with the stars, confusion only multiplies on this bright and zany planet. We warm to darkness like soulful fins, whose apportioned lot is both to be happy and suicidal simultaneously. And so we bow down, not in gratitude or with heavy hearts, but because in this vast selfie of a universe, we see ourselves in you. Sometimes a dummy, sometimes a ventriloquist, but made in your image, which is, dear Lord, where all the trouble begins. All right, there's a lot there, right? There's a lot there. Wait, go back. All right, there's a lot there. All right, so basically, we are dealing here with a conception of heaven, right? Like, what is heaven, right? Heaven is being back with the Creator, back with God, back with Christ in the Christian perspective, right? And so again, like this is a talking about the divine experience from the eyes of a fallible human. The author of this poem and the speaker in this poem are very much aware that, hey, Mr. J. Charles Garfield, how you doing, brother? Good to see you. In the chat out there in Facebook land, hey, thank you very much. But so the idea here, right, is that this is a personal idea about a very flawed, very, very fallible notion of theology, right? And it's kind of imagining in a very funny kind of way, like a very colloquial kind of like reality TV kind of way, what would heaven be like? And you'll notice there are many references to American reality TV shows in here that are kind of lend some humor to the notion. Let me zoom in so y'all, I'm sorry, I'm zoomed out a bit. Let me zoom in so y'all can see the first part at least. We'll go through it part by part. All right, we can see here. All right, cool. There we go. All right, there we go. So even the first, so also just for those who are doing poetic study out out there, right? This poem is written in couplets. So couplets are two lines. So we have two line stanzas. Two lines break, two lines break, two lines break. And you'll notice for the first couple of couplets, no pun intended, that we have full sentences in the couplet, right? So just think, my theology is fuzzy, but my hopes are high. I mean, just this line itself is very intelligent, very prescient, right? So I don't know theology. Theology is the study of God, the study of the afterlife, the study of the eternal, right? My theology, like I don't know that much about theology, but my hopes are high, which is funny because if you think about that, right, we're hoping, and we talked about the first week, right, that the metaphor about what is up is good because God is up and Satan is down. So if you're aiming high, if your hopes are high, if you're aiming for the sky, you're aiming towards God, and that is good, right? So the idea, my theology is fuzzy, my hopes are high. It's kind of this weird idea about how on earth, but maybe we don't know as much about God as we should. Maybe we have not studied the Bible as much as we should, but our hopes are still towards God because we have something inside of us that directs us towards God anyway, right? So that's a very clever first line as far as I'm concerned, right? Um, Perhaps I'll see my old dog Biscuit or chill with a friend or two. And this is just kind of like common notions about heaven. Like maybe our pets will be in heaven. Maybe my friends will be in heaven. Like who knows what's in heaven? Maybe we'll see it, right? And this kind of just does that, right? And then we have a really funny kind of twist here in the third stanza, right? And wonder of wonders, my headmistress ex-wife will finally have my undivided attention. And so it's just very funny because, okay, so obviously it's an ex-wife. It's somebody the guy's been divorced with on Earth, right? But from the way that he's portraying it, this woman was a very demanding woman. Always went, hey, honey, listen to me, honey, listen to me. Let me tell you, listen to me, honey, right? And so the funny thing about that is in heaven, in a Christian conception of heaven, where the eternity spans out for forever, and there is nothing but time for all time and eternity, right? Well, your ex-wife will be able to corner you, and you're like, oh, I got to do this, I got to do that. No. No, you like she will have your undivided attention for an eternity within an eternity, right? So it's kind of saying it's funny that no, amen, Grandpa Charles. Our hope is in Jesus, and it is sure hope. No, amen, amen. And this is just kind of a funny thing about like imagining from a very human perspective, right? Imagining how that could be in a funny way, right? And so to think about that, okay, so say that you have an ex-wife out there on earth who wanted to tell you all about everything all the time, and then you were like, no, you're dodgy. You're like, hey, I gotta do this, I gotta go work, I gotta go there, I can't listen to you right now. Well now you're both in heaven, and so now you have an eternity, and so now whatever it was she was trying to tell you when you were down on earth, well, she has plenty of time to tell you now, and you cannot get away. That's kind of where the joke comes in on that line, right? I was undivided attention. And now here's like the interesting thing, and this is actually a very deep theological point here with this part. You'll find out whether God has a name stitched on his shirt or as an undercover boss, as a register behind the counter, right? So there's the idea, right? Like whoever you do to the least of the people, thus you do unto me, right? That Christ is there in the presence of the most downtrodden and the most disaffectioned people on the earth, and also the woman who came before your door and you turned her away, or the man who came before your door begging for food. That was Jesus Christ there, right? And so that's what's trying to say is in these two comparisons, right? Whether God has his name stitched on his shirt, being like, okay, I'm God, I'm here, do well in front of me, right? Or undercover boss, it's a reference to a US TV show, but more it's going to that line of questioning I was just talking about, right? That idea that God is everywhere. God is amongst the least of the people, and he's all knowing, and he's all seeing, and he's all present. And so if you were to treat one of his creatures poorly, he will see that like an undercover boss in a way, or like someone who you don't know is looking, right? The same idea, right? Like God's not going to come judging us, being like, "Oh, I was always there," letting you know, because the same thing happens with the police, right? You're driving 100 miles down the road, and you see oh, there's a policeman up ahead. Oh, brakes on, going the speed limit. Yes, Your Honor, going the speed limit. No, you weren't. You weren't going the speed limit until you saw the policeman was there to catch you. The same way a lot of human beings go through life not doing the right thing because they don't think God is actually watching them to catch them, right? And so even though God's all present and all knowing and all watchful, right? A lot of people like wouldn't care to do anything different unless they saw the name sits on the shirt. If he was undercover boss, if he was the guy behind the camera, in like the what would you do scenario, right? People would still be acting just as wanton and terrible as they have, right? And so that's what this is getting at, right? And so I think it's also pretty cool to say, so again, the next two couplets, right? I'm hoping I get credit for all the times I walk up to the edge and stopped, but who's to say? And so this really goes to that human notion about despair, right? Like what the author of this poem is saying is like there's been times in his life when he's maybe not suicidally, but like in something, going to do something poorly, going to do something that is bad, is not a good idea to do. And he goes up to almost do it, and he stops because he knows God is what he knows there is a divine accounting that will come. And he wants to have credit. He says maybe he'll get credit for all the times he was about to do something bad but didn't do it. But who's to say? And then the old boy, right? Maybe the old boy, capital O, capital B, capital old boy, right? Is God in heaven, right? Will just shrug his shoulders and say, your craziness is my craziness, and call it a day. Which is very funny because the idea about us being made in the image and likeness of God, right, is that we are made in God's image and God's likeness. And so, as much as the craziness is our own crazy free will, as our own things we do, it's also the free will that God has given us to inhabit in, right? And so it's a very funny idea, right? That maybe God will say, like, because our free will is God's free will, and God gave us that free will, right? So maybe God will say, your craziness is my craziness, and call it all a day. I mean, that's funny, right? And then the author of the poem says, I have some questions for Socrates, and even a few for Jesus, right? But the funny thing there, for people who don't know, so Socrates, right? All the works of Socrates that Plato wrote were dialogues. So everything that Socrates is doing in all the works of Socrates, the Phaedo, the Crito, the Euthyphro, and the Euthyphro, the Crito, the Phaedo, and the Phaedo, yeah, were all done as, yeah, right, Dragon Charles, yeah, we're all the questions for Socrates were all of Socrates' dialogues were like people were asking Socrates questions and he was answering them, right? And so it's very funny that maybe he has some questions for Socrates and even a few for Jesus, which is actually funny because you think about the Gospels and Jesus, right? The Sadducees and the Pharisees were constantly questioning Jesus and saying, hey, what about this scenario? What about this? What would you say about this? And so a lot of the parables that Jesus gave in the Gospels were in response to the Sadducees and the Pharisees questioning him, right? And so it's just very funny for the author to put that, maybe I do have some questions for Socrates, who was his whole work was answering questions, and also for Jesus, who largely answered questions, right? So it's very funny. But if everything's wrapped up, meaning like life's done, like I'm wrapped up in a body bag, in a coffin, in the ground, well, maybe there's nothing left to talk about. So it's just kind of playing on this idea about death and eternal life, right? It's just kind of it's a very glib kind of thing, but it's rather funny, right? I'm gonna go here. Then he says, down here on goofball Earth, it's another story. So again, and Greg was very great about realizing how freaking goofy and crazy we all are. Like how insane human beings are and how we do stupid, crazy stuff. And like we like Pokemon and we like Dancing with the Stars and we like, right? And we have references to that here, right? We are goofballs. Half the stuff we do makes no sense, and the other half makes less than no sense. Like it doesn't. So down here on Goofball Earth, it's another story. Tangoing through the void, hobnobbing with the stars. It's like a tangoing, like dancing with the stars, hobnobbing with, right? A confusion only multiplies on this bright and zany planet, right? The multiplicity of the experiences we have just makes it more and more crazy, right? We warm to dark. Now here's a really interesting point I'll have to go over a bit. We warm to darkness like soulful fins, whose apportioned lot is to be happy and suicidal simultaneously. So let me break that down. All right. So, Finns, you see the capital F, Finns, people from Finland, the Finnish people, right? Who it's funny because, not haha funny. So the Finnish people up in Finland, right? We're in the Arctic Circle, right? And so they have a lot of darkness. They have like all light for half the year and then darkness for half the year, right? And so but as far as there's an international study that's done that like people in Denmark and Finland are the happiest people in the world by their like they send them a survey, like the UN sends them a survey and says how happy are you, blah blah blah, and they're like we're the happiest, and they're the happiest by their surveys, right? They also have the highest suicide rates of any two countries in the nation are the Scandinavian countries. They kill themselves more than anybody else. And so this kind of draws this is like bringing to point the idea that the people who respond on the surveys that they are the happiest people in the world also have the highest suicide rates in the entire world. And so, what the line here, the poem's trying to draw is that it seems to be that the Finns and the Scandinavians are both the happiest and suicidal at the same time. What seems to like go against what we would think, right? That you're only going to kill yourself if you're very sad and trying to escape life. But for some reason, the Finns have this weird, the Danish too, right? And the Denmark and Finland and now that other one, the Scandinavian one, Iceland, yeah, those people up there, yeah, like have the same kind of Robin Williams, like, yeah, comedians are like that too, right? It's also like the making yourself laugh so you don't cry kind of thing. There's a lot going on in this line, right? But it's also it's a very sad line in a lot of ways, but it's also a very human line. I think just to understand, like, when I'm talking about the expansion of the text, expanding it beyond what the words are, right? That it makes us understand the human condition even for humans who we never met or may never meet, or cultures or countries we will never meet, right? The way that it expands that out and gives us some understanding and grounding in that is important, right? And so we go now, and so we bow down, not in gratitude or with every heart, but because in this vast selfie of a universe, we see ourselves in you. And so this is very much a gesticular, a gesturing thing, right? Is the selfie, right? We see ourselves. No, absolutely, Philip. Absolutely, it is. No, totally. It is. It's a paradox and a dichotomy at the same time, right? And the thing is, like, how can we hold both of these things in tension at the same time, right? And yet we kind of have to not go one way or the other, to not be suicidal or overly happy, to recognize the world has its itinerant sufferings within it, right? We can't be just happy-go-lucky, right? But we also need not be suicidal. And so holding those things in balance really is the essence, I would say, of the human condition, and the holding these two different things in tension together, right? And not giving in to one or the other, right? And that's the human condition. That's what's very difficult, but that's what also makes it valuable at the end of the day, I would say, right? And so the last lines here, right? So we both bow down, not in gratitude or with every heavy hearts, because in this vast selfie of a universe, we see ourselves in you. So if you think about how you're taking a selfie, right? You kind of have to get down in order to get in the selfie, right? So it's like it's using the gesture or the physical spacing of how one takes a selfie, which is the most like unreverent, ungodly thing ever, right? But it's an image you have in your head of how you're taking a selfie, and you bow down, right? But then the funny thing, and it turns it all back around immediately, right? is because we see in the selfie of a universe, we see ourselves in you, capital you, Lord, you God. So when we're taking a selfie of ourselves and all our vanity and all our frivolousness and all our craziousness, right? We are made in the image and likeness of God. And so, as much as we're in our entire vanity, in our entire shameless human bullcrap, right? Our selfie is also a picture of God at the same time, because His image is our image, and we see ourselves in Him, and He sees Himself in us. Isn't that an amazing turn on the most demonic, the most like selfish, fucking stupid thing ever, taking a selfie, right? In some way is also us seeing our reflection in the divine and Him seeing our reflection in us. Like, this is why Greg is, I miss him so dearly. But yeah, brilliant man, right? Okay. And now, so we go back. So then the final two stanzas finish it off, right? Sometimes the dummy, sometimes the ventriloquist. So sometimes we're being puppeted by other people, sometimes we're puppeting other people, but made in your image. Whether we're being stupid or whether we're speaking your truth or getting other people to speak your truth, regardless, the most evil Jeffrey Dahmer, Sam Bankman-Fried, Donald Trump, whoever you want to say, the most evil person you ever want to think, right, on earth, still made in the image and likeness of God, right? Still made in His image. Whether the dummy, the one who's just parroting stuff, or the ventriloquist who's making people parrot stuff, right? Still in His image and His likeness, right? And the final couplet is like, which is, dear Lord, where all the trouble begins. Which is just perfect because, well, let's go back to a theology lesson for a brief second then, okay? We have different accountings of Adam and Eve and how the fall happened, right? But there's one, both the Islamic account and the Christian account, the traditional Christian account, and the Judaic account as well, has to deal with Lucifer, the morning star, saying to God, these humans do not worship you. These humans do not love you. God, why do you give them free will? Why do you give them free will and they will scorn you for that, Lord? Take away their free will. Take it away. Lord, I will make them obey. I will make them bow before you, Lord. I will make them take away their free will as you've taken the angels' free will. How dare you give the humans free will, right? And God says, no. My most perfect, my most beautiful creatures need free will because it has to be their choice, their free choice to love and to worship me. And the morning star, Satan, right, Lucifer, could not stand that. And so that's in several historical traditions how and why he rebelled against the throne of heaven, because he wanted humankind to have no free will, to be forced as slaves to worship before God. And God said, no. My beauty is evident, my glory is eminent. And for those who want to recognize it and those who want to worship, they are welcome here. And those who don't have no place in front of me because they've rejected the glory and the beauty by their own free will. And Satan, Lucifer, the morning star, says, no, we'll make them obey, right? And so this is where this line of the poem comes in, right? Because we're made in the Lord's image, which the Lord has free will. The Lord willed the universe, the Lord willed creation to exist as it does, right? And the fact that we're made in His image and have free will both to deny Him and to affirm Him is where all the trouble begins. It's where Cain slays Abel. It's where it's where Eve and Adam deny the Lord, because we become knowledgeable to our free will. And that is literally where all the trouble begins, right? So then the poem does a very good job of saying that in the context of the poem, but saying so much more about the whole human condition. And so I guess we're about done tonight. But I want you to look back at the poems we've read, right? And the thing we're talking about this week, right, is how saying a very little about an instance, the deer in the woods, right? Talking about the haves and have-nots in the first poem, right? Or in this poem, right? We're talking about a very similar, a very small thing, right? That has implications and expansions to the entirety of our existence, to our everyday lives. And that's what poetry can do. Poetry can talk about one little neat narrative in a page or half a page or a page and a half of couplets, like less than 200 words, but can talk about the entirety of human experience. And so you can find a copy of the poems in the link below. On the link on YouTube and the link in Facebook, there is a link to the Google Drive that has the entire packet of poems, all 15 pages of them, as well as an essay we'll talk about next week by T.S. Eliot called How to Read Poetry. It is all in the links below, as is a link, an email address, and a Dropbox that if you write a poem and you want to send a poem in for me to review and talk about and come back, we will do it next week. So check the links, check the descriptions. There is a Google Drive link to both this packet of poems as well as to the essay from T.S. Eliot. So read them over. If you have any poems to submit, or if you, hey Philip, if you have students who have poems to submit them, man. I will look them over and I'll bring them up on screen next week and talk about them. So this is session 2 out of 4. So we got 2 more left. So bring your kids, bring your families next time. Next week, same bat time, same bat channel, 8 p.m. 2 more left. So bring them up and we'll bring them forward, guys. Hey, God bless you all. You have a great rest of your weekend. So appreciate for you being here, and find the poem packet on the links below, and also a link to submit poetry for further workshops, and we'll keep this going. Hey, God bless you all. Thank you all so much for being part of this. Have a great time. Have a great weekend. And I just can't thank you all enough for being here. Take good care, everybody. God bless you.